Hi, I'm Perrine Toledano, the head of extractive industries at the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, CCSI. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to address your questions regarding the module on fiscal issues that Brian Len conducted. So I would check your questions right away. So there is a first question on how can government agencies simplify information about tax regime to make it more comprehensible and understandable for the average citizen in a resource-rich developing country? So government could publish a summary of their fiscal terms. The more they will put those fiscal terms in the law, the more the less they will be in contracts, the more they will apply, the more they will appear simplified to all, because they will apply the same way to all, and you wouldn't have to understand fiscal terms on a contract by contract basis. You will basically only have one source to refer to understand the fiscal terms of your country. Now, we also developed a tool, CCSI, the World Bank, and NRGI. We developed a tool called resourcecontracts.org. It's an online platform that stores more than 1,000 contracts and documents, all gas and mining contracts and documents. And we annotate the key provisions of those contracts, and in particular, the fiscal provisions. So our aim is to make those publicly available contracts accessible to the average citizen in a resource-rich developing country. So it's a tool exactly addressing the concern raised by this question. Regarding this other issue, this other question that was raised here, which should be the best fiscal regime to implement in a mining investment project in which the state has some equity? So I think, as Brian discussed, there is not one best fiscal regime. There are a few principles that should be applied that reflect best practice. And in the lecture, I'm sure you heard it said neutrality, progressivity, and simplicity. So these are the three principles that a fiscal regime that would want to be mutually beneficial for the investor and the country should follow. And then the government should set public policy objectives. What should be the goals of the fiscal regime? So it could be attracting more investment in exploration. It could be getting early revenues. It could be giving up somewhat on the early revenue in the hope to get a higher share of the project revenues in the medium to long term with more backloaded fiscal instruments. So there are a variety of policy objectives. There is a variety of policy objectives that the government could set and design a fiscal regime according to these objectives. And then once the government has an idea of what the fiscal what the design of the fiscal regime could be, the government should develop a fiscal model to make sure that the design answers the objective, that the fiscal package, which is the interaction of all the fiscal instruments together, makes sense, is effective in achieving the objective, is not too onerous on the or either the company or the government, that the fiscal regime reflects the principles of neutrality, simplicity, and progressivity. I hope this addresses this question. Now, there is a question on ring fencing, which is, ring fencing means that exploration and appraisal expenses from one permit onshore can be deducted from production project in another concession offshore. The permit and the concessions are under different conventions or concessions or contracts or agreements. Yes, this is exactly the point. If the law doesn't say anything about the possibility not to ring fence, the companies will not ring fence, and they will offset the profits of a profitable producing project with the losses of a non-profitable or non-producing country. Project. So it will reduce the overall taxable income. So what the question is explaining is exactly what's happening. And it is, so once again, it is merging the results of two projects belonging to two different concessions or contracts or agreements. It is important to understand that if the law needs to be very clear on this. If the law is silent, companies will interpret it as authorizing the non-ring fencing, right? Consolidation. The opposite of ring fencing is consolidation. So if the law is silent ring fencing, companies will interpret it as authorizing consolidation of results for taxation purposes. There is a question here. Okay, there is a question. The lecturer recommends to adopt a simple fiscal regime to enhance transparency. However, in practice, it is difficult because fiscal regimes are tailored according to many factors. How to make it simple? So, first of all, simple is relative to the capacity of the tax administration of a specific country. There is no meaning in putting in place a complex fiscal instrument that the tax administration is not capable of administrating. Then the complexity can be increased with the multiplication of fiscal instruments that duplicate each other's effect. So sometimes, and this is where the need for a fiscal model is really, that illustrates the need for a fiscal model, because the fiscal model will enable you to design a fiscal regime that is as effective as possible, and dropping some tax incentives or some duplication of, I don't know what, resource rate. For instance, a carried state interest can replicate the effect of a resource rent tax. A limit on cost oil can replicate the effect of a royalty. So many fiscal instruments can replicate each other and can offset each other. So having a fiscal model to test how your fiscal regime is effective will lead you to a simple fiscal regime. So as I said at the beginning, there are a few principles to follow. There are a few policy objectives to follow. And according to this, the fiscal regime should be designed and should be codified into law. What should be left to contract to accommodate the different factors that this question is raising, and to which the fiscal regime should be tailored, can be left to contracts, but this should be minimum. So putting more into law is also a way to simplify fiscal regimes. Another question here is, are there examples where contracts have been revised or renegotiated? Of course, many throughout the world. This is not really a question. It can come at the it generally comes more at the request. I mean, I don't know. In infrastructure, it has been evidenced in extractive nature. In the infrastructure world, it has been evidenced that renegotiations come more at the request of companies rather than government. But in the extractive sector, it hasn't been evidenced yet. The consequences are not always can just be natural, and there is a reading. There is a reading in your reading list that is called. This is a reading that we wrote at CCSI about the impact of fiscal reforms, facts and myths. I forgot exactly what the title that we gave to our paper, because it is from 2012 there. But what we're showing is that across 8 countries, when the renegotiation was carried out to fix a balance that was unfair, an economic equilibrium of a contract that was unfair at the outset for the government, it hasn't led to a decrease in countries' attractiveness. And companies are aware that a contract signed with a government is not, regarding deposits that belong to a country, is not the equivalent of a private commercial contract. So, and in addition, contracts signed in extractive industries are supposed to cover multiple decades. So when they are signed, they are not capable of anticipating the multiple changes in circumstances that will happen during the life of the contract. So by nature, contracts are incomplete, if we use the state of art. I mean, yeah, the term of art, sorry. So somewhat companies will resist it, but somewhat they expect that the contracts might not be stable over the life of the project, even though there is a stabilization clause, for instance. What I wanted to add to this, sorry, something was coming through my mind and I forgot. Yes, sorry. So what is important to avoid those multiple renegotiations is to put in place flexible mechanisms, built-in flexible mechanisms in the contract. That could be progressive regimes that self-adapt to the change in circumstances, or periodic review clauses, where both parties meet up at regular times to reassess the economic equilibrium of the contract. And it has proved very useful to maintain the channel of communications between the investor and the government, and anticipate this risk of renegotiation. Okay. Next question. No, okay. I'm selecting. I forgot that I had to select, and close the questions in order for you to know that it has been addressed. Apologies. Okay, moving on. Okay, so regarding fiscal incentives, I think there are two questions about it. How should states include fiscal incentives into their investment codes to attract investors and get equitable revenues in the medium and long term? So it seems on the face of it that there is a contradiction between giving fiscal incentives and getting equitable revenues, or revenues. I'm not sure what equitable means in this context, because fiscal incentives mean foregone tax revenues or tax expenditures. So fiscal incentives can be included in investment codes and can be used provided that a few principles are followed in order not to be a waste of revenues for the country, especially in settings when they are much needed. The lecture is alluding to this. The incentives should in particular be linked to performance, to the achievement of objectives. A certain amount of capital expenditure invested, job creation, contribution to an environmental project, using more water efficient and energy efficient mechanism, contributing to the research and development of the country. So there is a way to design the incentives that ensure that the country will benefit from non-fiscal benefits that will offset the foregone tax revenues. In addition, incentives should be codified in tax codes. They shouldn't be given on a contract by contract basis as much as possible. If they are given on a contract by contract basis, then they should be absolutely transparent. Tax incentives can be a channel for corruption, misallocation of resources, tax evasion. So a minimum set of oversight mechanisms should be put in place in order to avoid these problems that I just mentioned. In addition, they should be periodically reviewed in order to make sure that those incentives achieve their objectives that the countries would have been set in advance. Another thing to understand is that tax incentives will not compensate for a lack of fundamentals in the country. If there is, or will not fully compensate, let's say, if there is no infrastructure, no skills, corruption, red tape, bad business enabling environment, incentives will somewhat not compensate for it. And it's better for a country to collect a fair amount of tax revenue and invest it in fixing those issues before thinking of allocating and granting tax incentives. And last, once again, a fiscal model will help you assess whether your tax incentives are useful. And also compare the different impact: accelerated depreciation, loss and carry forward, tax holidays. So tax holidays are generally recognized by the field as being totally ineffective in achieving objectives and leading to tax evasions. So in any event, it's better to focus analytical efforts on loss and carry forward and accelerated depreciation, for instance. There can be also investment uplift. There are various range of incentives that can be given, and they should all be assessed against the existing fiscal instruments. Okay, another question. So there is a similar question here. Do you think that fiscal incentives are suitable for investment in poor countries? And I'm selecting it. So this is the same. This is. I mean, the answer is a bit similar. In poor countries, there is a high need of revenues to invest in the development of the country. The fundamentals are not necessarily in place, so there is so revenues need to be there to be invested in really fixing those fundamentals. So giving fiscal incentives can come as contradictory to these objectives. So fiscal incentive, when they are given, they require a very cautious approach, in particular in poor countries, given the rest of the considerations that I just mentioned. A cost-benefit analysis is much needed to really make sure that fiscal incentives do not cause more problems than what they are supposed, than the problems that they are supposed to fix. Okay. So I'm unclear here. Is it not possible to develop extractive industries with a rigorous legal framework? So I'm not exactly clear why it wouldn't be the case. I'm trying to see what is hiding behind this question. It is very important to actually develop a rigorous legal framework to govern the extractive industry sector, given the risk, the extent of risk and benefits that are associated with the extractive industry sector. They deserve a particularly rigorous legal and fiscal framework. So I'm not sure what is hiding behind this question. So there are questions here on the EIT. I am not sure it is relevant for this hangout on fiscal issues. So I will leave this for another Google Hangout on transparency and the effectiveness of existing initiatives. And I guess I'm not sure. I'm not seeing any more questions to address here. So if people do not have more questions, I feel like I need to end here. I will wait for another few minutes to see if more questions come up. Okay, so if there is no more question, I think I will I will end here, but feel free to reach out by email or on the forum. Oh, maybe. Okay, 2 more questions here. There is a question here. Do tax holidays qualify as environmental subsidies that many organizations and governments are calling for to be withdrawn? Not really. Environmental subsidies. So I'm not sure. Fuel subsidies, but they are not environmental subsidies. Fuel subsidies should be really withdrawn. Environmental subsidies, in terms, I guess, of helping companies achieve environmental objectives, they are totally different from tax holidays. So tax holidays give, for instance, it will be said in a contract or in the law, for 5 or 10 years, companies will be exempted from paying income tax or all taxes. And so during that time, the company will just not pay taxes. So the government will give up on a few years of tax flows. Environmental subsidies is just giving a subsidy, meaning it can take different forms. It can take, for instance, can be a credit, or it can tell the company you can deduct your investment expenses against the taxable income. But this is pretty common. Or the government will contribute to part of the environmental expenditures, or the government will top up the environmental expenditures for tax purposes. For instance, the company will not be allowed to deduct not only the environmental expenditures, but also an uplift on 10% on this. So these are all types of subsidies that can be implemented, but they are very, very different from tax holidays. So another question here, poor countries depend widely on income from taxation. However, we see that investment companies are spared because of incentives given to investment. Is it not possible to consider those incentives as responsible of the underdevelopment of poor countries? I would say it's a very strong statement. For sure, incentives that are granted in a way that is reckless will be a draw on government revenues, and those revenues that could have been invested in development suddenly are not there anymore. In addition, some incentives can lead to tax evasions, because companies will find a way to exploit the existence of incentives, and it can lead to transfer pricing, international transfer pricing, domestic transfer pricing. So this manipulation will exacerbate the negative impact of incentives on revenue. So I would say it is an issue that should be monitored very closely, but they are not really entirely responsible for the underdevelopment of poor countries. Of course, there are many other issues that should be considered. Okay. Any more questions from the audience? So I will wait for another minute or two to see if questions get populated. If there is no more question, I will end the Hangout. Okay. Saying that I clarified the question of tax holidays versus subsidies. I'm glad about this. So please let me know. Do you really think? Okay. Hold on. Do you really think that incentives help poor countries? No, I didn't say that. I hope it's not a reaction to what I said, because it's not at all what I'm thinking. I'm saying that very carefully designed incentives proceeding from cost-benefit analysis can lead to investments or more investments under certain circumstances that should be very closely monitored. Incentives can be very dangerous for poor countries. And they might be sometimes useful, but they should follow a certain number of best practice principles that I mentioned, and they should also be regularly reviewed and tested by a fiscal model, and a review of the achievement of objectives by the investor. So thank you for asking this question if I was not clear enough. So there is a question here. Do you have a view on whether strong environmental and social regulation on extractive industry company influences the investment climate of a country positively or negatively? So, hold on, I just need to select the question. Actually, strong environmental and social regulations that are, of course, not that are just, following best practice principles of environmental and social and human rights. So they are conducive to a country that is more stable, more developed, where there is more trust in the country. And it turns out that companies prefer investing in this kind of environment because it guarantees the stability of their investment over time. This is now strong environmental and social principles are codified by the IFC performance standards that are sometimes incorporated into contracts and laws. So even though those standards are not binding, they are made binding by contracts and laws. They can be made binding by contracts and laws. There is also the UN guiding principles regarding human rights. In the same way, they can be made bindings by contracts and laws, and they are supported by a consensus of companies. So countries shouldn't be afraid of putting in place strong environmental and social regulations that follows the principles put forth by those international initiatives. And it will not decrease at all the country attractiveness, on the contrary. So I'm waiting for another minute or two. I'm saying that it's worth waiting. Sometimes questions come up. Please let me know if some questions that if I haven't addressed well a few of your questions, please let me know. Feel free to re-ask, or feel free to tell me that it was not clear enough and I can just re-explain in other words and terms. I hope the French accent is not too bothering. So there is a question, I mean, as I said, it's not really related to this on the EITI, but just in case, and I'm not even sure that I understand fully the question, but will the EITI communication strategy be one size fits all or based on scenario? Oh, I'm not pretty clear. What is for sure is that the EITI is a product that can be adapted to every country context. It's a government-led initiative at the country level, and every country is free to I mean, there are a few standards that should be followed for sure, but then in terms of expanding the scope, having a law based on EITI, or putting some provisions in contracts, or devising a certain type of communication with civil society and companies, there is a variety of ways to approach EITI on a country-by-country basis. And it should, of course, be adapted to the country context, the local institutions, the existing channels of communications between the different stakeholders. So there is really some, when a country starts embarking on the EITI, the country should really assess what models within the boundaries of the EITI, what model, operational and communication model will be the most adapted to the country context. Okay, so I guess I will wait for another 1 or 2 minutes, and if not, I will stop the Hangout. seeing that there are still 10 viewers. So how can incentives versus performance be assessed? So I wonder if your question is whether performance-based incentives, I mean, what can be the method of reviewing and assessing the impact of performance-based incentives? I hope this is your question here. So first, it depends on the type of performance that you would have defined, right? Whether it's capital expenditure, whether it's job creation, whether it's sourcing power from renewable energy, whether it's contributing to R&D. It can be anything really that you can discuss with the company. It can be also related to local content targets. And then in terms of assessing, so the company should really report on this regularly, so on a quarterly basis, every 6 months on a yearly basis. And you should be able to closely monitor what is reported by the company. Make sure that you really understand what is in the report. Ask the questions. Keep your critical mind and not take what the companies give as granted and necessarily telling the truth or something. So reporting requirements are needed, and then monitoring and auditing capacity. In the contracts or in the laws, you have also the right to put in place clauses that says that that the company will go to the field, to the well, to the deposit, to inspect what's going on in the premises, and check the books and everything. So it's certainly, the government has certainly a right to audit what's going on at the mine level or at the oil well level. So I hope it addresses your question here, because it was not clearly formulated to me, but feel free to re-ask if not. So I'm waiting a little bit more. If you have more questions. So there is a question here. Are tax incentives appropriate in European countries to support the exploitation and extraction of gas by hydraulic fracking? That's a difficult question. That's a difficult question, I would say. I would say you might answer this point by having the same approach. What's the cost-benefit analysis of the incentives that you will be giving to this project? Are those projects needed in the European context at all? Is there proven environmental impact on water of these projects? So they will come at a high cost. So I think the methodology that I formulated before applies here. What are your objectives with those projects? are the incentives justified by a net positive cost benefit analysis? Do this project need incentives at all? Are you sure that you know all the costs? Are you sure that you're aware of all the environmental costs that are involved there? So there is no yes or no. There is just, the answer is always do your work, do your preparatory work, do your analytical work, use the right tools that are out there. The World Bank has in place an advisory mission for all that is related to incentives, and they have developed tools to help you carry out this cost-benefit analysis. And not only the World Bank, the IMF and other as well, other organizations as well. Just in the context of the US, they have cost-benefit analysis tools that are available online, maybe for a fee. Or I can, if you email me, I can give you a sense of what they are. We also about to publish a book on incentives, and it's called Ringfencing incentive policies. So, and the whole thrust of the book is to say that countries need a cautious approach to incentives in a context where a lot of public policy objectives need to be achieved and financed by public revenues. And a few chapters explain how to carry out a cost-benefit analysis that take into account the sustainability development goals of a country. So I invite you to get this book whenever it is out in a couple of months. So I will wait another minute or two to get your answers. Okay, one more question here. Do you think there would be more accountability if the revenue generated for extractive sector of the economy is managed separately by a constituted accounting body rather than being controlled by the central government of most developing countries? So I'm sure you're all aware of the natural resource funds that have been set to ensure that those resource revenues do not disrupt accountability and macroeconomic and I mean the accountability mechanisms of the government and the macroeconomy of the country. So to use it again, this term of ring fence, many funds have been set up to ring fence those resource revenues from political issues or economic issues. Of course, it's not always successful if the right governance mechanisms are not in place. Transparency, oversight mechanisms, clear fiscal rules that answer clear fiscal objectives, code of ethics for the managers, an investment strategy that answers the objectives of the fund. So there is like a broad set, there is a blueprint actually that we devised with our partner organization NRGI on this, and that should be followed in order for these natural resource funds to be a successful recipe for a country. So I invite you to go to either CCSI or NRGI website and access a project called Natural Resource Funds, making them work for citizens. There we have policy briefs on the different governance mechanisms that should be put in place in order for those funds to be a successful mechanism for a country. And then we profile 22 funds across 18 countries, and we assess the governance mechanisms in those countries to inform the thinking of other policymakers that would either set up new funds or reform their funds. So I really invite you to consult those resources that are freely online, to make sure that you get some answers to your questions. In general, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that there is a portal called negotiationsupport.org. This is a portal developed by CCSI with a lot of supporters from donor agencies, where we map out the roadmap of the investment process from preparation for negotiation to monitoring of the contracts that have been negotiated. And sorry, the first phase is to put in place the policy and the legal framework that will frame the negotiations of contract. And there you will find a wealth of tools and resources that can help you address all your questions regarding the whole value chain of the investment process. You will also find them there, the negotiation support providers that are out there to help countries conduct their investment process or negotiation or development of legal framework or development of monitoring and implementation capacity of contracts. So this portal can really be your go-to portal in order to access all that you need to really have a good understanding of the investment process and how to conduct your investment process that will be mutually beneficial for both your countries and your investors. We have 7 more minutes. Feel free to ask more questions, to ask for more clarification, tell me if some answers were unclear, to ask for more resources that are out there. So I will wait for another minute. And if there is no more question, I will stop broadcasting. Okay, thank you, everyone. I really hope it solved some of your questions. Feel free to reach out by email to continue asking questions on the forum. And we are here to really help you navigate the challenges of extractive industry and how to ensure that they contribute to the sustainable development of a country.